AITA for letting my husband's family pay for our wedding, knowing I was going to use their prenup to bankrupt him? If you ask the members of the Westbridge Country Club, I am a gold digger. A parasite, a working-class mistake who conned her way into a legacy and tore a prominent family apart out of pure spite. They say I should have just walked away quietly. They say I didn't have to humiliate them. But old money relies on silence to cover up its sins, and I make my living with a sledgehammer. I don't do quiet. Let's get the background straight. I am a general contractor. I own a bespoke construction firm that specializes in restoring historic properties. I work 60 hours a week. I have dirt under my nails. I drive a 3/4-ton truck, and I built my company from absolutely nothing. 4 years ago, I was hired to restore a 1920s carriage house. The owner was Julian. Julian was old money. Generational, untouchable wealth. He had never worked a physical day in his life. He found my calluses charming. He said I grounded him. I thought he was pretentious, but he was persistent, and over the course of a year I fell in love with him. His family, however, did not fall in love with me. A group of wealthy, unsmiling people sitting around a long mahogany table. The camera slowly pushes in on an older woman with severe features. To Julian's mother, Eleanor, I wasn't a business owner. I was the help. I was a blue-collar anomaly sullying their bloodline. When Julian proposed, Eleanor didn't congratulate us. She invited me to her attorney's office. She slid a 70-page prenuptial agreement across a glass table. She looked at my hands, smirked, and told me that her family's legacy needed to be protected from opportunists. The prenup was brutal. It dictated that if the marriage dissolved for any reason, I would leave with exactly what I brought in. No alimony. No claim to the properties. Nothing. Julian sat next to her and wouldn't meet my eyes. He whispered that it was just a formality, just to keep his mother happy. Most women would have thrown the pen in her face and walked out. But I build foundations for a living. I know how to look for structural weaknesses. I told Eleanor I needed my own lawyer to review it. She rolled her eyes but agreed. I didn't take it to a family lawyer. I took it to a ruthless corporate litigator who specialized in hostile takeovers. I told him to accept every single one of Eleanor's financial demands, but to bury a reciprocal morality and conduct clause deep in the addendums on page 62. The clause was simple, but catastrophic. It stated that in the event of documented infidelity, the at-fault party would instantly forfeit their vested liquid assets to the injured party, and the injured party would assume full ownership of the primary residence. Eleanor's lawyers were so focused on making sure I couldn't touch their trust fund in a standard divorce, they didn't even blink at the morality clause. They assumed Julian was perfect. They assumed I would be the one to mess up. They signed it. We got married. The first 2 years were fine. But Julian got bored. The novelty of his hardworking wife wore off. He started spending more time at the country club, leaving me alone at the townhouse we had supposedly bought together, a townhouse funded by his trust but completely gutted. Rebuilt and restored by my own 2 hands. Then came the rainy Tuesday in October. My crew was pouring a concrete foundation, but a massive storm blew in and flooded the site. I sent my guys home and drove back to the townhouse at 1 in the afternoon and head home. I didn't hear them at first. The house was quiet. But as I walked toward the kitchen, I saw a pair of wet, designer heels kicked off by the stairs. They weren't mine. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my keys. I walked up the carpeted stairs with absolute, dead silence. The master bedroom door was cracked open, muffled laughter and the rustling of sheets. It was Julian and Victoria, a trust fund heiress Eleanor had always wanted him to marry. They were in the custom-built bed I had framed myself. I stood there for 3 minutes. I watched my husband, the man whose family called me a parasite, betray me in my own home. I didn't kick the door in. Anger is a cheap emotion. Anger makes you sloppy. I didn't want to fight. I wanted an execution. I quietly walked back down the stairs, went out the front door, and sat in my truck in the pouring rain. I pulled out my phone and hired the most expensive private investigator in the city. For 6 excruciating months, I played the devoted wife. I came home covered in sawdust, cooked him dinner, and asked him how his day at the club was. He would kiss my forehead, smelling faintly of Victoria's expensive perfume, and tell me he was exhausted. Every time he lied to me, I smiled. And every time I smiled, my investigator added another time-stamped photo, another hotel receipt, another piece of irrefutable, court-admissible evidence to a growing file. By December, the file was 2 inches thick. Eleanor had a long-standing tradition. Every Christmas Eve, she hosted a massive, formal dinner at her estate for the entire extended family. Aunts, uncles, board members, 40 people sitting at a table that cost more than my first house. That was where I decided to swing the hammer. The dinner was agonizing. Eleanor spent the first hour making passive-aggressive comments about my business. She asked if I was going to ruin my back before I could give Julian a child. Julian just laughed and took a sip of his wine. When the main course was cleared, I stood up. I picked up my wine glass and tapped it with my spoon. The entire table falls silent, looking at her with a mixture of annoyance and confusion. Eleanor glares from the head of the table. Clink, clink, clink. The ambient chatter instantly stops. The cello holds a single sharp note. The room went dead silent. Eleanor looked at me like I was a rat that had crawled onto her plate. I want to thank Eleanor, I said, my voice echoing in the massive room. 4 years ago, she taught me the importance of protecting your assets. She taught me that family is a business, and contracts matter. I reached under my chair and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. I didn't hand it to Julian. I slid it right down the polished mahogany table until it hit Eleanor's plate. Eleanor's manicured hand slowly opening the cover. Inside that folder, I continued, are 84 time-stamped photographs of Julian and Victoria over the last 6 months. There are credit card receipts, hotel logs, and sworn affidavits from a licensed investigator. Julian choked on his wine. He stood up so fast his chair crashed to the floor. What are you doing? He stammered, his face turning pale. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Eleanor. If you recall, Eleanor, page 62 of the prenuptial agreement you forced me to sign outlines the forfeiture of assets in the event of documented infidelity. Julian has violated the morality clause. I watched Eleanor's eyes scan the legal document my lawyer had placed at the front of the file. I watched the exact moment she realized what her lawyers had missed. Per the contract, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent room. Julian's vested liquid assets, the $2.4 million in his primary trust, are now legally forfeit. And the historic townhouse? The one I rebuilt? It is now solely in my name. Julian has 48 hours to remove his belongings. The silence in the room was suffocating. An uncle at the far end of the table slowly put his fork down. Julian was openly weeping, begging me to step outside and talk. I didn't stay for dessert. I put my coat on, looked at Eleanor's stunned, horrified face, and walked out of the estate. It's been 3 months. The contract held up in court perfectly. Julian is currently living in a rented apartment, cut off from his furious family. I sold the townhouse to a tech billionaire and rolled the profits, along with Julian's liquidated trust, into expanding my construction firm. Yesterday, I got a voicemail from Eleanor. She called me a monster. She asked how I could sleep at night knowing I ruined a man's life over a mistake. I sleep beautifully in a house I built myself. So, tell me, am I the asshole?